I see that some of you out there have small kids, and we have an hour and a half before potluck. Should I preach for an hour and a half or maybe cut it a little bit shorter? Shorter? That's a lot of confidence. How many of you watch TV in the last year? On TV, they have commercials, and I'm going to give 2 commercials before I start. I have a few jobs in the conference office, and one of them is trust and wills. How many of you have a trust or will? Raise your hand. How many should have one? Raise their hand. You may say to yourself, well, I'm not worth anything. That may be true, but it depends on how you pass away. You can pull out today from our church here, and if you have a head-on collision with a cement truck, and it's their fault, all of a sudden your estate may have been worth $10 or you're $1,000 in the hole. After the collision with the truck, then your estate could be worth $500,000 or $1 million. And where does that money go? It goes to whatever the state designates it, and not to where you want it to go. So it doesn't matter how much you think you are worth a lot. And if you have small kids, and the state will determine where the kids go, not your parents or your siblings or anybody else. The state determines that. So it's important that everybody has a will. The Oklahoma Conference will write a will for you at no cost. If you'll leave 10% of your future assets to the conference, I will come up here, sit down with you, and ask you some questions. It takes about a half hour. Fill it out. We'll send it to a lawyer. He will go over it, and then we will do a will for you. So if you want to have a will, talk to me afterwards and think about it, because it is very important to do that. Number 2, I pastor the Summit Ridge Church. It's a retirement center that the conference owns. We have approximately 90 individuals living there. How many of you are over 55? Raise your hand. Then you are eligible to move there. Let me ask this question. Does anybody in this vast congregation have their parents that live at Summit Ridge? Really? Who are you? I've never seen you before. His parents moved from Illinois. They saw the lights probably 6 or 7 years ago, and they moved to Summit Ridge. It's an Adventist community. All your neighbors are Adventist. The church is on the ground. We have assisted living on the ground, a nursing home on the ground. The church is on the ground. And we're close to Oklahoma City, but we're total country. So you have the amenities of the country, the amenities of the city, but you have the life in the country. So if you're ever interested in coming down and you're over 55 and you'd like to look at Summit Ridge, we'll gladly show you around there. I'm going today to talk on witnessing. I will submit to you that the Adventist church, when it comes to witnessing, is a total failure. When's the last time your church board came together here and discussed having a second service? When was the first time that occurred? If you travel through the Oklahoma Conference today, there are approximately 8,500 members. There will be less than 3,000 that will be sitting down in our Adventist churches. 1/3 of our people will be coming to church. Where are the other 2/3? When I drove to the church this morning, did I get in a traffic jam with people going to the Adventist church? There are 4 million people that live in Oklahoma. And we have how many in church today? 3,000. Why aren't people coming to our churches? When's the last time you had to run out and print more bulletins because you didn't have enough bulletins? You had too many what? People. I sit on the union committee, and they talk about the last quadrennium, how many people we baptized. We baptized, they say, like 10 or 15,000. And then they say, well, let's praise the Lord. We baptized all these people. And I sit back there not saying anything and said, aren't there 35 million people that live in the 5-state area? And we baptized how many? 15,000? We are a total what? Failure. If you worked for a company and you were only reaching, your whole audience was 35 million and you're only reaching 15,000 every 5 years, how long would you be employed? They'd fire you. Why are we not succeeding as a church? Now, this is a problem, though, not only in Adventism, it goes across the board. In the United States this next year, there will be 1,000 churches, Methodists, Presbyterians, that will close. 50% of the pastors that are pastors wish that they could do what? Quit. And you go into the small churches around, and they're closing right and left. You go to some of the churches in the 1980s and early 90s. You went to the Central Church in the 1990s, and they had an attendance of 300. Today, they have an attendance of 60. You go to the Southern Hills Church in Oklahoma City. They used to have an attendance of 130, 140. Today, they have an attendance of 30 to 40. South Tulsa, the staff church, they used to have a very large attendance. Their attendance has done what? Gone down. What is wrong with the church? Why are we not witnessing, and why are we not doing what we should do? Now, what I'm going to say to you is probably a little different than you anticipate what I'm going to say, but turn with me to the book of John. John chapter 17. Verse 20 from the New King James Version. It states this: I do not pray for those alone, but also for those who will believe in me through the word, that they all may be one, as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, that they may be one in us, that the world may believe that you sent me. The only way the world's going to believe that God sent Christ is if we are what? One. Is the Adventist church one today? Not hardly. You have the conservatives on one side, you have the liberals on the other side, and they look at each other at the general conference with daggers in their eyes, each one trying to get their own agenda across, feeling that that is what needs to be done. We argue about this, we argue about that, we discuss women's ordination while the world is doing what? Dying for lack of the person of knowledge of Jesus Christ. We are not one whatsoever. Each of us has our own personal agenda, our own ideas, and we will seldom back down from what we believe because we believe it, and it is what? Right. And we are not one. So I think a lot of times today, as I look at the Adventist churches, as a pastor, the main job of the pastor, I can say this, is trying to keep church members from killing each other. What did I just say? The main job is to keep members from what? Killing each other. I have sat on boards where the two head elders almost got into a fight. I've been cursed out on boards. Everything has happened. And I have a rather pull-back nature, not a forward nature. And all this occurs, and I think to myself, if I was a lay person, I would quit this church how fast? Fast. We're trying to do that. We are not one. And the only way you become one is if you understand the gospel of Jesus Christ and what he has done for you. Until you understand that, you will not be one. That's the first reason we are not growing, and it will always be the reason. But there's a second reason that we are not growing, and that is in our verse that we read in our scripture in Romans chapter 5 and verse 4. We glory in our tribulation or suffering. It was 2003, and every year my church does a Maranatha or a Canvasback mission trip. And we were on the island of Palau. Our conference president, Rodney Grove, and I were there, and we were looking around there in Palau. And the pastor that was there, his name was Pastor De Paiva. Now, he is from Brazil. Can any good thing come from Brazil? Is there any church members here from Brazil? He was a wonderful individual, and he took us around for 2 days through the islands there, the Rock Islands. And it was a beautiful experience, and we got to know him. He was a man of God. And we toured with him in October, and then the news came to us in December of 2003 that his house had been broken into. And the guy that broke into his house was high on drugs and really didn't know what he was doing, yet he did know what he was doing. And he killed Pastor De Paiva, killed his wife, killed his son, and brutally raped the daughter and left her on the side of the road to die. Now this shook the country of Palau. It's just a small island with 10,000 people. And at the funeral, Mrs. de Paiva had flown in from Brazil. And she went to the funeral, and afterwards, there were 3 holes dug there. And as she looked into the first hole there where her son was buried, and she said to herself, you know, I'm so glad I believe in the Sabbath. Did she say that? The next hole she went to, and she said, I'm so glad that I'm a vegan. The next hole she went to and said, I'm so glad. I understand who the Pope is and what 666 is, and I don't wear jewelry. Is that what she said? Her heart is rent to pieces. Her son has died. Her daughter-in-law has died. Her little grandson will never grow up. And what does she think? What does she say to herself when she looks into that casket there? What do we do when trials and tribulations come into our lives? What do we rely upon? What do we see? How do we witness when that happens? Many of you out there have had many things go wrong in your lives. Some of you have lost brothers or sisters. Some of you have had your spouses die. Some of you have been abused when you were young. Many of you have had terrific problems in your life. Has your Christianity helped you in those situations there? The 28 fundamental beliefs, a couple are very good for this time. The second coming, the doctrine of Jesus Christ. But when this happens, there are 3 things I want to look at when tragedies hit our lives. Number 1, we should never be surprised. Amen. Now, it says in John 16, verse 33, in this world you are going to prosper. Does it say that? It says, in this world you will have trouble. Now, you will have trouble before you're a Christian, and after you're a Christian, guess what? The troubles don't change. Let me say that again. Before you're going to have trouble, and afterward you're going to have what? Trouble. So therefore, when a crisis situation hits you, we should not be surprised. I'm afraid too many times as Christians, when something hits us, we are taken back by it, we are surprised, and we react the same as the neighbor that lives over here. We are no different in our reaction. And we say to ourselves, and I've heard members say over and over again, why me? I had a good diet. I followed the blueprint. I did this and I did that. And now I have what? Cancer. Why is this happening to me? We are surprised by it. We should never be surprised by it. Number 2, we should never be shaken by it. Usually when something goes wrong, we are people that are shaken. Now, in the New Testament church, what was the greatest witnessing tool that they had? Think about it. What do we consider today our greatest witnessing tool? We think it is, well, let's go out and pass out some literature, which is we should do secondarily, but not primarily. Maybe somebody says this or they say that. Today, as a pastor, when somebody asks me, you Seventh-day Adventists, what do you believe? I only focus on one thing and one thing only, and that's the person of Jesus Christ. I stay as far as away I can from the Sabbath and a lot of the stuff like that, because I found out after 40 years of telling everybody about the Sabbath, what's my batting average? 0. I haven't convinced anybody. I've convinced a lot of people, but who cares if you're convinced? I'm convinced that the sun's going to come up, but so what? In other words, I only focus on the person of Jesus Christ. People today are looking at you. You claim to be a Seventh-day Adventist. You claim to have something that is different. You claim to have the truth. You claim to do all these things. Are you any different than anybody else? We have the truth, but we are not different than anybody else. It's like you guys are a beautiful red Ferrari. That's the 28 fundamental beliefs. And people say, wow, that's a beautiful car. I wish and everything like that. But the problem is we don't have a key to the Ferrari. We have the car, but we don't have a key, and the car just sits there, and people look at it and say, what good is a car unless it does what? Drives. And this is what made the New Testament Christians such great Christians. In the Roman Colosseum, there was an individual that used to go to the Colosseum. He produced olive oil. He went to the Colosseum, and he had season tickets to the Colosseum. And when he went to the Colosseum, he'd go to gladiator matches. And in gladiator matches, you have two individuals in the gladiator match. How many walk out? One. In our sporting events today, usually both people walk out. Very seldom does someone die into something that we do sporting, and it's not supposed to happen if it does happen. So in the arena there was constant death. And now this guy sits there, and he watches the Christians be brought in. Non-Christians have a fear of death. Some of you have a fear of death. And as the Christians came in, this individual looked at the Christians over there. They were not trying to break away from their Roman captives. They did not have downcast. They were not crying, but they had a smile on their face, and they looked jubilant. And the Roman there looks at those individuals, and he thinks to himself, what do they have that I don't have? I worry about my business all the time. I worry about my family. I worry about death. And he looks at those Christians there, and he sees them die. And he says to himself, maybe they have something that I don't have. Our lives are what is important, not so much what you believe. If it was important on what we believe, it is important what we believe. That's secondary. But people come to this church today. I don't know how many times in the past I've explained the 28 fundamental beliefs. That doesn't change anything. What changes something is when I'm in a crisis situation and how I react. Now, this is my theory on how I would react. I may not do this, but I would hope that I would. I'm not feeling very good. And I go to the doctor. And the doctor says, well, Bill, you have a very fast-moving cancer. You have 3 months to live. 3 months. And then you will no longer live. I think to myself, well, I might do chemotherapy. I'm still fairly young, but I guess I will. But the first thing when I do, I am not calling the church elders of the church to pray for me. What did I say? I'm not going to call the elders to pray for me. God has every hair on my head numbered. He loves me, and he knows what's best for me. In the last 3 months of my life, as I am in the hospital, as I am in rehab, as I am in hospice, I have one goal and one goal only. And that is to be a witness through my behavior to the nurses and the doctors that come and take care of me. If they accidentally bring me the wrong food, I'm kindly going to say, I just won't say anything, really, not worry about it. If they don't turn me like what they should, my concern is to talk to the nurses about their families and show them the love of God in my heart and that I love them and I want them to be where? In the kingdom. My destiny is secured. I have nothing to worry about. I have been saved, and now I want the love of Christ to flow through me to them. And if I die, as Paul says in Philippians, it's good. If it's not, it's good too. I do not fear death today. The New Testament people actually look forward to it in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. They're talking about much better to take off this coat now and go to heaven. Wouldn't it be much better to be up in heaven where there is no trial, there is no tribulation, and you're with your friend and Savior, Jesus Christ? Instead, we go around and we complain, and I've seen my church members trying to hold on to life, and I've seen a wife say to her husband, breathe again, try to get him back, and I've seen people die. We try to grasp life, we're scared to die, and if you are a Christian and you understand salvation, you will have no fear of death. It is just another step along the way to be with the person of Jesus Christ. And when you have no fear of death, and you live that way, people will ask you questions. So many times when we witness, we think it's our responsibility to bring it up. It says in 2 Peter that have an answer when somebody does what? Ask who? You. You're not asking them. They're asking who? You. I mean, they see that you're different. The problem is, in this world today, it doesn't work. People are out there today, and they look forward to the weekend, and they say to themselves, I'm going to get drunk, I'm going to take drugs, I'm going to try to wipe out what's going on for just a moment, and then I can try to exist. And they look forward to the next high, to the next high, to the next high, and that's what they do because they don't have strength in the inner man, as it says in Romans. Do you have today strength in the inner man that you can be a witness, and you don't have to worry about what you're going to say? God will tell you what you need to change. We are shaken too many times, and we ask the question, is God a good God? Why does he permit this to happen? If he had the power, why doesn't he change it? Why doesn't he get rid of the famine in Africa? And we hold grudges against God. We can think these things, but I don't think we need to verbalize them to other individuals at all. Paul was shaken once in a while. He wasn't happy once when Titus wasn't there and different things. But he is walking with Jesus Christ, and he knows where his destiny will lie. So we shouldn't be surprised. We shouldn't be shaken. And the third thing is we should never anticipate things are going to get better. What did I just say? Never anticipate that things are going to get better. If you go to a psychologist or you talk to someone, they say, well, the clouds are up there, they'll soon part, and things will get what? Better. And I've used the line many times and told some people, don't worry about it, it will all get what? Better. It will all work out. Paul never says, or any New Testament writer ever say, that things are going to get better. And if you understand that, then you're not disappointed when things don't get better. And that's something we as Christians need to realize, that we are on this earth, we are witnesses, as it says in Matthew chapter 5, to give glory to who? To God. So as you walk through life, you're going to be surprised? You shouldn't be surprised. You shouldn't be shaken. You shouldn't think things are going to get better. You know, you look at the politics today of our country. Either you're a Democrat or you're a Republican or maybe an independent. All of them have this idea, if they're in control, things are going to get better. It says in the New Testament that the wars will wax what? Worse and worse. Today they think, well, we can do away with abortion. We'll be a much better nation. If we get the right judges, we'll be have a better nation. And we all, as Christians, all try to get groups together or petitions or politicians in there change all that. What a waste of time. When Paul was on this earth, he brought his group together and said, let's get a petition out to stop gladiator fights in Rome because they end in death. Does the New Testament say that? No, what Paul says is honor whoever is in control. Don't worry about that. We do not need to be involved politically. If an individual thinks he's called to politics and he wants to fight something, I have no problem with that. But corporately, we do not need to go out and try to change this world. It says that at the end, the days will be like what? The days of Noah. Things are not going to get any better. And Ellen White even says our church will appear that it's going to almost what? Fall. And so what's our responsibility then? Is to witness about Jesus Christ. Now, this is what happens when a person becomes a Seventh-day Adventist. We are most effective the first 3 years that we are Seventh-day Adventist. And we come to a church and we find something that we may be interested in. For example, many years ago, the church had stop smoking plans. And you could get involved with stop smoking plans. You can get involved with many different ministries in the church. As a pastor, when I first came into the church in the 1980s, we did Revelation seminars. How many of you have gone through a Revelation seminar? And then we do evangelism. And the conference encourages us to do that, and we can encourage to have meetings. And at workers' meetings, many times they'll bring a pastor in that's been very successful at his particular church, and they come and tell all the rest of the pastors how to do it. And then 6 months later, guess who they bring in again? Another pastor who explains to us how to do it. And then we wait another 9 months, and they bring another pastor in who explains to us what? How to do it. And all our churches stayed what? The same. Some of the pastors, I think, adopt some of this stuff, and they maybe do some of the stuff, but our churches are still what? Empty. And you become a Christian, you adopt something that you want to do. You adopt this, or you adopt that, and you adopt all these things that are external. And let me say this with kindness. It's much, much easier to adopt a ministry or a program than it is to change internally. I can offer every cooking school that there ever was and be what inside? A disaster. I can do all this stuff and still be a disaster. Because it's easy to do a ministry and get up front and tell about it, but it's very difficult for me to love the Lord thy God with all my heart and love my neighbor as myself. I am trained to love myself. I make the right decisions 98% of the time. Just ask my wife. If I have a discussion with my wife or an argument, I don't have it unless I'm what? Right. Think you're the same way. You're not going to argue with somebody if you agree with them. We are all in love with ourselves, from beginning to middle to end. All you have to do is listen to a conversation. What does the person immediately start talking about? Who do they start talking about? Themselves. And as a pastor, sometimes the older members, I've heard the same story how many times? We are consumed with ourselves. And if you are consumed with yourself, how easy is it to love your neighbor? It's not. You know, and when Christ talked to the rich young ruler, what he said to him, what does the law say? And the rich young ruler says it. He says, to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart. If you have that foundation and you know what the doctrine of salvation is and who Jesus is and what he has done and is continually doing for you, then you have the ability to love your neighbor. And then the third thing, which I'm a disaster at, love your enemy. Now, half the church likes you when you come, and the other half of the church likes you when you do what? You leave. I am paid to like you. And externally, I can like every church member, and I can be extremely nice to every church member. But the problem is, God can read my thoughts. And when he reads my thoughts, I'm saying to myself, oh, he has cancer. That's too bad. He got 3 months to live. Lord, can we make it 2? I'm not that radical, but I'm just saying, people say that to themselves. You're the same way. If you have a bad boss or something like that, or does this or that, are you praying that you get a promotion? Or are you praying that they fall flat on their face? Be truthful. You're not going to say it out loud. But the problem is, we do not love our enemies. We tolerate our enemies and things like that. It's like when I get kidney stones periodically, I tolerate them, but I don't love it because I know it's going to cease. It says love your enemies, and it doesn't matter what they do to you. No, it doesn't matter what they do to you. And we as Christians are total failures there. We don't love our neighbors. We don't love our enemies. And so when people say, well, you believe all these doctrines, why should I join the Adventist church? I have to give up OU football? Then you guys tax me 10% on your income. And then you ask for Oklahoma 2%. Then you ask for the building fund. Then you ask for that. Why should I give all this stuff up when you handle your problems the same way I handle my problems? And they see that, and that's why the church is empty today, because you're no different than anybody else, and you're no different than the person that's out there or around this church here. You react the same way. Philippians chapter 1. Let's go to Philippians chapter 1. Paul. In the book of Philippians, where is Paul at? Some of you have read it. Verse 14. Most of the brethren in the Lord have become confident by my chains, are much more bolder to speak the word without fear. So, where is Paul at? Prison. Now, what is this prison like? Does it have air conditioning? Does it have heating? Did they get their mattresses from Mathis Brothers? Is the toilet paper Charmin? Is the food catered in from Olive Garden? Would you want to be in one of those prisons? If you were in one of those prisons, what would your attitude be? As a pastor, I get the opportunity to go to prisons very often, once in a while, and I hate going into prisons. It just gives me the willies. Some people love prison ministry, bless them that they do it. But others of us, ooh. And here is Paul, and he's chained to 2 Roman imperial guards. These are the best of the best soldiers. And Paul is there chained between them. They have heard about Paul, that he's leader of this sect. And so when they're chained next to Paul, in the first 30 minutes, Paul leans over and says to the first prison guard, you know, the Sabbath starts sundown Friday. And the prison guard looks at him and says, what? Is that what Paul did? I submit to you, he didn't do that. The prison guards took his chain and they yanked it. And it tore into his skin. And guess what Paul says? Nothing at all. Paul says, I need to go to the bathroom. And they say, well, we could probably do it in a couple hours. And they spill Paul's food all over him. And they wake him up every hour on the hour at night. And Paul sits there and he revels that he has the opportunity to suffer as who? As Jesus Christ. And there's a smile on his face, and there's something different about him. And after a while, the Roman guards are there that are rotated between them. And it says the whole palace guard knows about Paul. And why is that? Because Paul doesn't react like anybody else reacts. Ellen White says when he went to be beheaded that he won people for Jesus Christ because of his attitude and his conduct. And I think Paul was there, and one of the Roman guards says to him, why are you different than all the other people we've ever sat by or been forced to be with? And Paul says, let me tell you a story. And he begins with Jesus, the incarnation. And he goes through the miracles of Jesus and says, you know, Jesus touched the leper. He talked to the woman at the well. He wasn't a racist. He talked to the brilliant Nicodemus. He talked to the woman caught in adultery. And they told stories about Jesus Christ. And the Holy Spirit flew through his voice, Paul's voice. And these Roman guards were melted. And when they were melted, they accepted Jesus Christ. And many of them went to death in the Colosseum. He did tell them later, secondarily, about the Sabbath and the doctrines of our church, but it wasn't primary. His main focus is Jesus Christ and him crucified. That has to be in you. You have to dwell on it. You have to lay awake at night meditating on what God has done for you. More than that, you need to meditate on what God has done for you and what he is doing. And you think about that he in the Trinity came down to this earth, chose to live, and you need to see how wide, how deep the love of Christ is for us. And as that melts you, then you are able to do what you need to do. Go with me to Romans chapter 5. No, excuse me, Romans chapter 8. Romans chapter 8 and verse 18. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. Paul is saying what? I consider that the suffering that I'm going through is not worthy to be compared to the glory which shall be revealed in us. That's the glory of Jesus Christ. But you notice here the word consider. In some versions, the word used is reckon. And what that means is that you know what you believe and why you believe it. I'm an American citizen, and I travel quite often in other countries. And when I'm in other countries, sometimes things go wrong. Do I ever question if I'm an American citizen or not? No. I know that I'm what? An American citizen. I know that I was born in 1956 in California, and I have a passport in my pocket. If some disaster happens to me overseas and I lose my passport, I'm still what? I'm always an American citizen. I have never doubted that I'm an American citizen when I'm outside of the country. Have you ever doubted that Jesus Christ is your master? When you doubt that, then you are shaken. You always have to remind yourself that you are a Christian. This is what has happened. This is what's happened on the cross. This is going on. You need to think. I'm up here to make you think. That's why I speak to you. You need to think and understand what you are. And if you understand what you are, it doesn't matter what the tribulation is. Because Jesus Christ has died for you, and he loved so much to die for you, it doesn't matter what happens to you. Because you have confidence in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and then you can be a witness for him. Back to the funeral. Mrs. DePaiva was at the funeral. And it was a gut-wrenching funeral that lasted 4 hours about her son, her daughter-in-law, and her grandson. And Mrs. DePaiva got up and she spoke. And she said this, and this is recorded in a newspaper 1,000 miles away in Guam. And Mrs. DePaiva called the mother of the individual that had murdered her family, the mother, up to the platform. And she said to the mother at the platform, you know, we all bring our kids up. Sometimes they do good. Sometimes they don't do too good. But we do our best. And then Mrs. DePaiva reached out and forgave the man that killed her family and offered forgiveness there. And that was all. She did that. And the audience was shaken by that. She could have told him any doctrine that she wanted, but to forgive like that. And I think to myself, if my wife and my son and my daughter had been killed just a week before in a brutal murder, and I wanted revenge, how could I do that? Mrs. DePaiva is a Christian. Today, the man is in jail that killed them all. He's a Christian, and he's witnessing for the person of Jesus Christ. I glory in my suffering.